Today we have the Ayatollah of fantasy rock and roller with us today, Adam Rank. How you doing, Rank?
They look great in person, and I just can't wait till next year where we can pack it full of 25,000.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. I didn't know it was Ball Guys Day. It was being ranked. I mean, how can you lose?
This is the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast.
Hello and welcome to Behind the Grind, presented by the Fantasy Points Media Group. Remember, head to fantasypoints.com, enter promo code Vipers22 and get 10% off that subscription today. As you notice, there's no major, there's no terror today. That means I'm going one-on-one with one of the content creators over at Fantasy Pros, the pride of Roger Williams University, a man whose motto is, when in doubt, order tacos, the one and only Andrew Erickson. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing great. It's a great model to live by. It's something that I use constantly because I'll look at menus and be like, oh man, like I like this, I like that. Oh, they got tacos. Oh, boom. There you go. Makes life easy.
I mean, it's a lot better to go with a chicken schnitzel, right? You know what you're getting with the taco. It's going to be a little bit of ground beef. I don't know if you throw a little bit of chicken in your tacos. That's a little weird to me. But you give me some ground beef in that taco. I don't need anything else. Maybe a little sour cream, a little salsa, and I'm happy. That's it. That's all I need. Maybe cheese. Gotta get the cheese in there.
Oh yeah, you got to get the cheese. Like the cheese without, sometimes I once ordered an omelet one time. I know I'm going off topic with tacos, but for some reason I didn't put cheese on it, and it was a horrible experience. So it's just like. So I learned a lesson that day. Is like, always got to get cheese, tacos, omelets. Cheese is a must.
I mean, I think we have to stop the show right now. If you're a guy who gets omelets without cheese, that just seems wrong.
It was a mistake. It was a grave mistake that I made, but I've adjusted since.
Well, that's good to hear. So one mistake we never make here is how we start this show off each and every week. Are you ready? These are the hard-hitting questions, Andrew. I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but we come at you with some hard-hitting questions. Starting off, if you were a closing pitcher or a WWE superstar, what is that intro music that cues you up to come down to the ring, to come down to the mound? What are you listening to get the people into it?
Enter Sandman by Metallica.
Okay, yeah, I can dig that. I mean, a little bit of Mariano Rivera kind of feel there to it. A little Sandman from the old ECW days.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, I want them to know exactly who they're up against and that it's game over.
Well, so we know what game over means, but now I know everyone has one of these songs on their playlist right now, whether they care to admit it or not. So what is that guilty pleasure song for you? Is there a little Shakira, a little Britney Spears? What's that one song you're like, oh man, I hope he doesn't ask me what I have to listen to?
Oh man. I feel like it changes, honestly. Like, there's a lot of songs like that. One of the songs that I like that is way past, what you'd expect for someone my age, but "Hungry Like the Wolf" by Duran Duran is
all right,
song that I don't know why I like it so much. I think it's because like my parents listened to it a lot when I was younger, and I just fell in love with the rhythm. And every time I hear it, I just blast it on the radio.
You can't go wrong with the 80s, queuing that up every once in a while because it just hits a little bit different there. Now, I know I paid a lot of attention to the 80s music. That's kind of what I like to go back to every once in a while there, but it kind of brings me back to my youth. So I'm going to ask you this. How did sports develop you as a youth, and what kind of sports did you play growing up?
So yeah, I played a lot of different sports. My parents kind of, had me get a lot of different experiences. So played soccer, I played baseball, I played football, I ran cross country and track. So I kind of did a lot of different sports. I played soccer probably the most when I was younger. I did more baseball in like the high school level. That was kind of like my main sport. And then I eventually played football the last 2 years of high school because at the time my school that I went to didn't offer a football program until my junior year. So I was able to take up football for like the first time. Like, I never had played like Pop Warner or anything. Like, was never, I didn't put pads on until I was 16 or 17 years old for the first time. I was like, oh man, like this is way different. But it was so worth the experience of playing the game that now I get the luxury of talking about from a fantasy perspective as a full-time job. And again, the experiences are a lot different, but I learned so much about, football and the camaraderie. I think that was my favorite part of the game was the camaraderie of playing with your teammates and just sports in general. I really like the feeling of team, and it's something that you use today. A lot of obviously in the workplace, you're working with other people and having that sense of camaraderie when, hey, we have this challenge, like how are we going to attack it? And looking at it as like, hey, this can be fun. Like, let's figure out how we can beat, X, Y, and Z, and how we can, overcome adversity. And I think football, especially like when you're dog ass tired and like the coach is like, get on the line, you're gonna run wind sprints, and you just like everyone like looks and you're just like, oh, we all just want to like hurt. Oh, we're just like, oh no, please no. But you're in it together, and that's what makes it worth it.
Yeah, we always have those dreaded words like the bear crawl. That comes to mind. As soon as the coach says that, you're like, oh, here we go. Or you're looking for who did it? Who set the coach off today? Who pissed the coach off to where now we have to all do this? But what are some of those teams that you kind of grew up watching and idolizing there, so to speak, and some of your favorite athletes growing up?
Yeah, so I grew up right outside of Worcester, Massachusetts, so in central Mass. So I grew up, a New England fan, so rooting for Red Sox, Patriots, all those different types of New England teams for the most part. But I definitely liked baseball more growing up. So I watched a lot of Red Sox, and I fell in love with guys like Manny Ramirez, David Ortiz. I liked those Red Sox teams a lot. The '04 Red Sox, obviously winning the World Series and breaking the curse. That was just a really special time to be like, and I was like newly into baseball at that time. So for me to kind of watch that unfold as I was kind of introduced to professional baseball from a viewing experience, like that absolutely got me hooked. And yeah, Manny Ramirez was definitely my favorite, baseball player. Still is probably to this day. I just thought that his attitude that he would bring to the ballpark, whether it was him like listening to his headphones out in left field. But at the end of the day, it's like the dude just could flat out hit and play like one of the best hitters in the MLB. So even though he had these a very quirky nature to him and very playful nature to him, and sometimes he wouldn't take things too seriously. I always liked that about him, and obviously he was a great hitter.
Well, anyone who can go and like relieve themselves in the middle of the game inside the Green Monster, I mean, they get a little extra bonus marks there for me. So you mentioned quirky. So I know I stalk people through their Twitter accounts and through social media platforms to kind of come up with some different things here. And one of the things I kind of seen on your LinkedIn profile or somewhere along the way was the connection to the Spartan races. So I got to ask, if we had Andrew Erickson and we had Joe Pisapia there and we had D Brown going at a Spartan race there, first off, would any of you make it through the Spartan race? And second off, who would win that?
Oh, yeah, I would definitely win. No, I don't think it's even close. I mean, I've done them before, so this would not be something that I think would be too difficult for me to overcome. Those other guys, I don't know what they do. I see them, I know they work from home. I don't know if they work out. I don't know if they exercise. So I would definitely take me at minus money.
Yeah, I think Joe might win. If there was like a sword fighting part of it, I think he might be able to take that part of the whole thing there. D-Bro, I don't know where we're going to go
wild
there.
card. Total wild card.
It is, but I think it'd be kind of fun. I mean, everyone's talking about these flag football games going down in Canton at the Expo. There's a little bit of a poker going there, a little cornhole tournament. I mean, it almost feels like we need a Spartan race there at Canton for that Expo too, just to see how it all plays out. I know I'm out. I'm not even going to get bothered getting in there, but I mean, I see Nick Whalen, I think it is. He posts stuff on Spartan races all the time. I'm like, you guys are idiots. There's no way. I don't even run from like my couch to the bathroom. And if it gets to that point, it's like, you know what? It's in God's hands at this point. So we're not going to worry about that so much. Now, I've kind of watched your career kind of go from the gridiron experts to PFF to fantasy pros. So what's kind of one of those decisions that kind of changed the trajectory of your life right now?
I think for me, it was just kind of the conscious decision to decide to kind of go all in and really like bet on myself and be like, all right, I really like doing this. I don't like the full-time jobs that I have right now that is, that I'm doing for a living. Okay, like how do I make fantasy my full-time gig? And ultimately I came to, and I also was trying to be aware of the time. It's like, okay, I'm 25 years old, 26 years old. Like right now, this is the time where I can sacrifice and try to make this my reality. Because if I'm 35, it's going to be way harder to try to reset my life. It's like I have the opportunity right now with no responsibilities besides, I don't have a family. I don't have, I'm not paying for a house. Like I have the opportunity to kind of put my career as the number one most important thing. And that's what I did. And ultimately I was like, needed to figure out a way to break into the industry more so than I had been doing. And I did that through networking and doing it through, okay, I need to go to these conferences, whether it's the FSGA, whether it's the Fantasy Football Expo, like I need to put myself in a place where not only can I show off, the work that I've done, but I can put a face behind the work, behind the Twitter Abby, because that's how I've gotten all my jobs, up to this point, is because I knew someone that worked at the existing company. And that people like to hire who they know. So I knew that I was qualified to be, a full-time fantasy analyst. Like I knew I had the talent and the skills. It was just a matter of getting the exposure, getting the reach out to the right people. And I knew that my best odds of that happening were putting myself in a place where, oh, there's going to be a bunch of fantasy analysts at this Buffalo Wild Wings. Like I'm going to go. And I'm going to talk to as many people as possible, even if it's a little bit awkward. I was definitely shy, going to these types of conferences, but I was like, you know what? You just got to talk to these people. Like, that's why you're here. Go print off some business cards, go hand them out, and that's your mission. Like, and try to maybe have some fun, but make it your mission to be to talk to as many people as possible. And you only have to get lucky once. You only have to get one job opening. And I wanted to make sure that the one time that a job opened up, I would be on the list of top contenders because I made the right connections.
I like how you say that, because the one thing a lot of people maybe get that misconception of is a lot of people in this industry may be intimidating, or, someone. So I find that completely the opposite. I mean, everyone I ran into, even the start of this whole behind the grind, it was like, oh man, I don't know if I can approach them. But as soon as you approach them, they're like very accommodating. They're willing to jump on, which you're like, oh, okay. And all you need is that one first person to go, yeah, I'll come do the show with you, or hey, yeah, I'll talk with you for a little bit. And then once that builds up, it takes off from there. But where did your confidence come from? Like, where did you get that confidence? Go, you know what? I am all in. How did that decision come about?
Well, I think part of it was, positive feedback from people that had, taken a look at my work when I was doing it, part-time. Basically, I would come home from my full-time job and basically just do fantasy until I ran out of gas. That's basically what I would do. I would just kind of work on my passion. I would get out of the office at 5 o'clock, 5:30, and just try to get home as fast as possible. Listening to fantasy football podcasts all the way through, just trying to, okay, how can I absorb more information? How can I get more ideas? And just constantly getting in reps. I think that's the biggest part of it. I know that I wasn't, I had a podcast that I was doing. I don't know how many people listened to it, probably not that many. But every time I did it, I got better. Every time I did it, it was really for me, not really for the listeners. And that's kind of just gave me more confidence as like, hey, like I can make this happen. And again, it's cliche to say like you put your mind to it and you can make anything happen. Part of that is true, like obviously, and not all of it is, but thinking that combining my work ethic with also a strategy and strategic approach to, all right, if I make the right connections here, I think that this can help me really get to the next level.
Well, let's talk about that. When you first started to where you are now, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen, not only in the industry, but in yourself, and how you make that delivery?
I think that the industry has gotten a lot. I mean, it's definitely competitive. That's number one thing. Like, there's a lot of people doing it, and trying to find a way to make yourself stand out. And how I was able to do that was through like connections, because I know that there's a lot of people that can do what I could do, at least from the beginning. Writing articles, and that's why I think that separating myself was trying to get repetitions in videos. I was always trying to do more video content. I was always trying to do more podcast content. I was trying to do, how can I get better at X, Y, and Z? Coming up with different ideas on how to approach things. I know last year I started a TikTok. Like that was something that was still kind of not necessarily a lot of people were doing, I think, for fantasy. And I think still that there's some untapped potential with TikTok. And that's why I continue to try to like chug away at it, despite the fact that the algorithm seems to hate me, more often than not. But it's something I continue to keep trying and keep approaching. And I think that being open to different ideas helps you stand out from others. And at the same time, remember that fantasy is about having fun. And as an analyst, yes, it's important to be accurate, but it's also important to be someone that's enjoyable to listen to or to read or to, that's why I always try to be respectful, on social media, because, at the end of the day, like, I'm always reflecting not myself and whatever company, I was working for at the time, or company I'm working for now at Fantasy Pros. It's like, that's why I don't, make rude comments to people, even if people are coming at me because I had a bad take on X, Y, or Z, or you're dumb because you think this player is this or whatever. It's like, hey, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Twitter's a public free speech. You can say pretty much whatever you want for the most part.
And people will.
Yeah, and people will, and I embrace that. I like to have the conversation, and really, like, the only reason I don't like get into it on Twitter is just because I'd rather do it on like a podcast. It's like, hey, like, if you really want to like debate with me, then like, let's have a dialect. Start a Twitter Spaces. Invite me on, and we'll talk through it. Like, it's so much easier than me like going back and I got to respond to this. I got to respond to this. Like, that's not a useful part of my time or your time. Whether we can create some content around it. So it's a long-winded answer of saying kind of the things on my mind, based on the question.
So you do a lot of video there. What's the best way to trick the camera? So I know I do a lot of individual podcasts, 7-minute clips. I've done like 30-minute videos by myself. By the way, if you're ever talking to yourself for 30 minutes, there's probably a bigger problem at hand than anything. But you start off looking right at the camera, and then all of a sudden your eyes start to drop. You start to read what you got kind of going there. So do you kind of just go with like some point form type things, just kind of get yourself into it and just kind of go with your knowledge after that? Or do you kind of read off a script? And if you're reading off a script, where's that camera placement right now? Because my camera is like way up here, but I keep trying to look up, and then I kind of bring my eyes back down, and they're kind of all over the place. So what's the trick to having that good eye to eye type thing on a video?
Yeah, I think that the important thing to do is, for the most part, what you're talking about. And I think that's something else that I've also improved a lot on. I would go onto a podcast and have like all these things prepared. Like, oh, I'm going to like, read off this, and this. But you start to realize that the human brain can only retain so much information at one time. And I try to, and it's something that I still, try to keep reminding myself of, like a rule of 3. It's like, say things in 3. I can give you, 10 reasons why a player is someone that you should draft in fantasy. Or I could just give you 3 reasons. All you need is 3. Like, that's really all you need. If someone is not convinced after you have listed 3 reasons to do something, then those reasons aren't strong enough. But if you list 10 reasons, it's overkill at that point. And it kind of like dilutes the reasons themselves. It's like, why did you have to give me 10? It's like, if you really had a strong point, then you would only have to take 1, 2, or 3 potential reasons. And if you can do less, I think that's even better. So I think that keeping things more clear and concise is a better way and approach on podcasts when you're talking about, arguments or points on a specific player or topic or team. And I think it's also important to make sure that that's the way that you operate, and that's the way that you kind of deliver everything, because it's easier for people to understand it that way. And you also know the material. I write about this stuff. I'm in this fantasy stuff all the time. So, you find that you don't necessarily want to come into a podcast like and perform off the cuff, but at the same time, it's like those boomer bust players, those other players we've already talked about. It's like, I don't need to have like those statistics listed up because I know about them already, because I've written about it like hundreds of times at this point, that we're in July. So I don't necessarily need it. And obviously, if there's like one specific number that I know I want to bring up and, I want to make sure I get it right, then okay, like you can pull up that specific number and kind of read it off. And that can be, you're not hiding from the audience that, I'm just going to read this statistic. But besides that, like, we know the player takes. We know them, and we should feel confident in delivering them. We don't necessarily need to read off, and that way you can keep better eye contact with the camera.
So I feel comfortable with player takes here. That's something I'm very good at. I understand that fairly well. I mean, off the cuff, hey, that's what I do my best work, when you just kind of freelance and let it go from there. Because mostly, and here's the kicker, I don't read well. So me trying to read off a script and coming across, I mean, it's just a disaster waiting to happen each and every time. But I need to know. So we know reading is probably not one of my hidden talents, but I want to know, what are one of your hidden talents right now? What do you got? Like recorder, xylophone? What do you got going on over there?
I like how you brought up the instruments, because that's the direction I actually was going. So I know how to play the trombone. That is
Nice.
my one of my cool talents it's been a while since I have picked up the old brass instrument, but I still have one. I still own one. It's at my parents' house. I do not remember the last time I played it, but I played it basically from 5th grade all the way up to the senior year of high school. So I got a lot of experience with the old trombone.
Do you have any band camp stories you'd like to bring up on the show?
Any band camp stories? I think that the only one I never went to band camp. I did go on band trips though. So we got the opportunity to fly down to like Washington D.C. and play in front of the memorial, which was pretty cool. And the only really story I can think of is that we got the opportunity. So when we were down there, we went to one of the amusement parks, like just as like a fun activity, a bunch of kids in high school. And there was one kid that got so stoned that he literally fell asleep on one of the benches in the park. And when like we were all supposed to like meet on the bus to like go home, like we couldn't find this kid literally anywhere. And then someone eventually found him passed out on this bench. So
That's a perfect band trip right there. And it sounds like he knows very well how to recharge when he needs to recharge. Now, I know one of the biggest struggles a lot of fantasy analysts have out there, those who are just getting started, those who've been doing it for a while, is when to find that time to take a break, recharge, off season, in season. I mean, now it all kind of drags together. I know you guys over at Fantasy Pros do a lot of content throughout the whole year. A lot of people are kind of cross-trade in fantasy baseball, fantasy football, all that stuff. So where do you find time to kind of just take a step back and kind of recharge? When's that downtime? And what do you do to kind of bring yourself back in? Because I know that's something that's important to you.
yeah, so usually most of the time, especially during the off season, I try to limit my workload, during mostly working hours. I get the luxury of working from home, so I can kind of make my own hours. So I like to work, I operate best in the morning. That's when I feel like I'm really zoned in and focused because, no one's really up. Like no one's on Twitter. Like I'm not missing anything. There's no news breaking. News doesn't break at like 6 a.m. Like it just doesn't. Like it seems like that's like the most dead time that there is in social media, and that's why I love working at that time. In the early window of the morning, and that's when I'm most focused. So I usually try to stop working. Early evening time, and at night I really try to disconnect. I try to get away from my phone. I try to I want to spend time with my fiance. I want to give her attention because we've obviously been working all day, both of us. And the same thing goes for on the weekends. Saturdays and Sundays, especially Sundays in non-football season. Like I tell her, it's like, hey, these are for you. Like the non-football Sundays are for you. So whatever you want to do, we're gonna do that because during Sundays or football, like where I'm gonna be. Like I'm gonna be on the couch watching the games. So I think that it's a good balance to have that and embrace that. And during the season too, I really try to take the Saturday as that day to really try to recharge and get set for the week because Sunday is really, I treat it as a work day. I tell people that, hey, like I know I'm watching the games, but it's still a work day for me. I'm going to have to do work after the games end and I'm really kind of plugged in. Like it's not something that I take off necessarily, even though it's technically not a day I'm like technically paid for. It's like, it's still part of my job. I have to know what happened on Sunday. So I really try to take that Saturday to really kind of disconnect, recharge, because if you don't ever find the time to stop, like you're gonna get burned out, and that happens. And I also try to be front with myself. It's like, am I taking too much on right now? Like, do I need to go on this like 12th different podcast? Do I need to write this article? Is there any way I can cut things off? So I've been pretty good with that. Being in the industry now, entering my third season full time, I've definitely got a better grasp on what I can handle and to say that, hey, it's okay, like to not work after dinner. Like, do I need to finish this article? Do I need to update this profile? Do I need to make this thing? It's like, no, like if it can wait till the next day, especially if it's not pressing, then let it wait, let it sizzle, let it, it'll be there when you wake up. Like, don't rush to get it done. Cause I think what we can all agree is the work never really ends. So it could go on forever. So you need to be in charge of your life and make the decision like, hey, what's best for me right now is to actually do something totally different and nothing football related and take my mind off of it.
Well, if you're taking your mind off of things, do you plug into the YouTube there a little bit? And if you do, what's on that YouTube playlist there for yourself?
Yeah, so I watch a lot of like YouTube videos based on like video games and stuff like that. I would say that, video games are something that I played a lot, growing up. It's not something I do as much. I still play games out here and there, but it's something that I still enjoy. Even like Let's Plays, where basically I'm like watching somebody else play. It's kind of like relaxing in a way because it has nothing to do with football, and I like kind of getting away from football, just for a break because it's like I'm in it all the time. I don't necessarily go on YouTube to watch more fantasy, football videos. Sometimes I will, but I like it to be kind of like totally off the grid, like nothing to do with fantasy sports. But at the same time, it is interesting to kind of watch creators and what they make. And it's something that I kind of like always think in the back of my mind, like, oh, like this is a really cool video for, it's a completely different topic, but it's like, I wonder how I could potentially use this type of concept in my own creation. So even though, I'm not there to, work, I always try to still absorb because there are just so many amazing creators out there on YouTube and other platforms. And same thing with like podcasts. Like I'll listen to non-football podcasts and just kind of like remember and try to take note of certain things I really like, whether it's like topics, whether it's, certain segues that they do or games that they play. So that's kind of what kind of helps me kind of mellow out and disconnect.
So I got to ask, when you're plugging into watching other people play games, maybe this is because I'm old now, but it's one of those things that drives me nuts with my kids. They're watching kids play games when there's like perfectly good playing field just outside those doors right now where they could be doing something, playing catch or whatever that looks like. And you mentioned these other podcasts, and it kind of got me to thinking here, maybe a little bit off topic with myself, but does your fiance, does she have this thing where she like watches like murder mysteries and stuff on TV? Or is mine the only one that does that? Because it creeps me out sometimes.
No, I mean you hit the nail on the head. So she doesn't watch murder mysteries, but she listens to like crime junkie podcasts.
Yeah,
like yeah, exactly. Some murder
There's
mystery
something
podcasts.
wrong with that. that is a huge red flag for me. Like I've been married for like 15, 16 years now, and I'm thinking every night it relaxes them. That's a scary thing. They're listening to these crime scenes and this murder stuff, and it's a relaxing kind of therapeutic thing. And I'm sitting there like, okay, so I'm glad I'm not alone on that one. But the one thing I need to know is, I know we don't usually talk about football when it gets to behind the grind, but I got to know, with everyone else kind of touting Gabriel Davis as a 2022 breakout star, I have it on good authority right now that fantasy managers, they should probably fade him right now. And is it true that you bought a Gabriel Davis jersey?
I did. Yes, that is true.
Isn't that the automatic right there? As soon as Andrew purchases that player's jersey, that's an automatic fade for fantasy managers.
Yeah, I mean, the track record has not been great for myself purchasing any type of jerseys. We could look through my closet. Honestly, you'd find what would you find? You'd find a Josh Gordon jersey. You'd find one in there. You'd find a N'Keal Harry jersey. Got one laying down in there. It's not a good scene. So. Maybe this is just the time where I'll stop drafting Gabriel. I mean, honestly, if you're going to stop drafting Gabriel Davis, this is probably the best time because it's right now his ADP's basically hit its peak. I mean, it is really high right now, so you're basically buying the fact that he's going to break out no matter what. So maybe this is the time where I'm just going to stop drafting him.
Well, I'm glad we got that out there right now. So anyone who's watching the show right now, Gabriel Davis is a fade, and you can blame Andrew for that. Now, I need to know also here, what is more difficult? Because I'm not a numbers guy. It's always been one of those things that kind of I struggle with. I'm trying to learn. I try and pick it up a little bit. I try to use numbers when I talk about when I break down film and stuff, I kind of combine the two. So what is more difficult to understand pertaining to fantasy football? That base data kind of stuff, data, I don't know what you want to call it. I call it data. Or foreign business policies?
I'm going to go with foreign business policies being more complicated. I mean, I think that we actually, in the fantasy space, I think that we almost do too much from a numbers perspective and that we could really simplify it. Something I've been pondering in my mind is talking about, for every position, if there was like one stat that you could use or like you could only use one stat for every position, like what would it be? And with running backs, it's really easy. It's like touches. Like that's all I care about. Like if I could only know one thing about a running back, what's his touches per game? And if you knew that and that's all you knew, you would still be able to find some success heading into the next season. Now with receivers, tight ends, and quarterbacks, a little bit different. I have kind of like teetered on what specific stat I would want, but it's not necessarily volume with those players. Now it's important, but we know those positions, especially quarterback, it is more about efficiency. Like It is actually more about being good. And then also then clearing and, okay, like rushing for quarterbacks. But for the most part, like if you're a non-mobile quarterback, like you actually have to be good in real life to be a good fantasy quarterback. Like that's kind of like the thing. Whereas other positions is not so true. So I think that with a lot of our advanced metrics, I think it's really fun to throw them around, like rushing yards above expectation, rushing yards after contact. But at the end of the day, it's like, dude, like how many touches is running back getting? Like, because that's ultimately what ends up mattering in the most part. So that's why I hate when we get cited yards per carry when every single year we talk about how yards per carry literally doesn't matter. And it's not predictive whatsoever. It tells us what happened last year, but it doesn't tell us what's going to happen next year. All it means is it's just like a stat that you fade. Like basically is kind of what I'm saying. And yet it's still like talked about as like, oh, like this great achievement. And yeah, that's what it is. It's an achievement. Like this player averaged 5.3 yards per carry last year. Okay, like what does that tell us about this year? Nothing. What's his volume going to be like? So I think that there are really ways to simplify the numbers, and I think that sometimes it's paralysis by over analysis or analysis by paralysis. Basically, it's like there's so much, and you're like, oh, like I don't know what to do. Like there's like 1,000 different metrics here. It's like just pick one or two, and I think that you'll be fine.
I think that kind of goes hand in hand with where we've seen fantasy football kind of go in general, from those old-fashioned standard leagues to now half PPR to full PPR to IDP to guillotine to all these different types of leagues that are out there right now. So I still remember reading and scoring my leagues way back when out of the newspaper, and there was no advanced data numbers to work with. I mean, that's just that baseball had them. I mean, baseball's always had those kind of advanced numbers that we're looking for. So I need to also know this. Do C4 analytics have anything to do with explosions?
They do not. No, they do not.
Well, that may be the most disappointing part of the show right now, because I was looking for some sort of C4 analytics there that went into some explosion type details, but it is truly as boring as I thought it might have been.
Yeah, I mean, that's why it was a job that it was my first full-time job working in marketing. And basically my job was to set up car dealerships on their websites. So basically I would monitor their websites to make them optimal for search engines and to make it easy for people to purchase cars and set up appointments with the car dealerships. And yeah, I mean, it was not a fun job. It definitely helped mold me to be more professional, which I thought was good. And I definitely, I mean, it was a tough job. Your first jobs are never going to be easy, and it never should be. But it did actually introduce me to a good pal of mine, Mitchell Renz, who was the person that introduced me into like fantasy Twitter. Like he was kind of like the one that like he was the one that first invited me to like my first retweet like share group thing with like articles where there was like a bunch of like random people. It was like, oh, like Dynasty, whatever, and like this guy like, oh, like, hey, I'm Andrew, and then I just saw like articles getting thrown left to right. I was trying to retweet them all and like them all, and I feel like it just comes so much farther than it was back then. But I still never forget that. It's like I never really knew that there was this like niche space on Twitter for fantasy football specifically, and I've now come to realize like they have these spaces for every different type of niche. Like, whether you're into skydiving, whether you're in like there's a community of that hobby or lifestyle or whatever you want to call it, like on social media, across different platforms. I just think it's really fascinating. And, the fact that I can kind of remember when I first like dipped my toe into fantasy Twitter, I didn't know what I was getting myself into, I guess is the best way to put it.
I still don't know what I'm getting myself into 9 times out of 10 on Twitter. If you weren't in it right now, kind of making it as an analyst there, as a full-time kind of gig there with Fantasy Pros, where do you think you would be what would you think you'd be doing right now? Like job-wise, profession, where would you be?
I mean, I'd probably still be working in marketing. So whether probably working for an agency, doing some type of advertisement. I know that I did at one point dabble a lot in health and fitness, in terms of, whether it be a personal trainer, whether it be in terms of working for a gym as part of their marketing department. I know that's something that I had a lot of interest in college. Obviously we talked about sports earlier. I wasn't good enough to play, sports at the collegiate level. But that didn't necessarily mean I didn't have a fire for competition. And that's kind of what introduced me to, like, definitely became like such a gym head, during my college days. That's what I would do with my friends. Like, we would literally just work out and go to the gym and just like eat a lot of food. Like that was what we did all the time. And I've significantly lost a lot of my muscle since those days, my peak muscle days. But I'm hoping to get back into it because it's still something that another thing that I do to kind of like disconnect is like, I still love to work out. Working out in the morning again, it's part of my morning ritual. Getting in a good exercise, getting into good sweat before the day starts, and knowing that I've already accomplished so much by the time I kind of sit down, around 9 or 10 a.m. to kind of like wrap up and start the second part of my day. I've already conquered so much in the morning, and topping off with a great workout. It's just something that's really important to me. So I would definitely say probably working in that type of space as well. If I wasn't doing fantasy full time, and yeah, I think that's probably where I'd be at.
So I want to know this as well. What has fantasy football taught you about yourself?
What has fantasy football taught me about myself? I'm repeating the question because I'm trying to delay and trying to get the answers into my mind.
I do that all the time. I delay, I repeat myself. And you know what? People think you're going crazy half the time, but no, there is a little bit of, there's reason why this kind of works out this way. Even right now, as I'm mumbling and stumbling through words right now, I'm trying to buy you a little extra time on this question in particular.
I guess for me, it's taught me that, if you do have a goal in mind, and if you do decide to try to go all in at something, that it's worth doing. Whether it's a career path that you're trying to pursue, and not to say that everyone is going to get there. It's always hard whenever you try to chase your dreams to accomplish that. But I think it's worth at least trying. And I guess I'd rather say, like, I'm glad that I tried, and even if I'd failed and wasn't able to break in full time, but I at least had given every effort I could have. And if I hit a timeline where it's like, hey, I'm like out of time, like I can't keep pursuing this, I have to move on, then I would have been able to kind of like sleep better at night knowing, hey, I gave my all, it didn't work out, but that's okay because, I definitely did everything in my power to try to make it work, and it just wasn't meant to be. The things were not meant to fall in place. So I think that that's something that kind of lives with me today. And to think about, my path, I think that was a really smart decision by me to just continue to go at it as best as I could and to not give up. It definitely taught me to have thick skin. I think thick skin too. I think, because you're getting pegged and pointed and judged in so many different ways, it's like, hey, at the end of the day, this is a game. It's a game, and it's supposed to be fun. And I always try to remember that too. It's like, hey, if I ever start to get super stressed out about, player X, my rankings, it's like, take a step back. It's like, whoa, like my fiance is doing some BS work where she has actual clients and like actual issues she has to deal with. Like, I'm working in fantasy sports. Like, I got it made. So I need to stop being stressed out. I need to be the fun guy, having a good time, and hoping that everyone else enjoys the content. And again, I work hard, not to say this isn't a hard job, because you do have to put a lot to work in it, especially during the season. Like, you are on the clock basically nonstop, and it is a lot of man hours. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm blessed to do what I do for a living, and every time anyone asks me about, oh, what do you do for a living? Or what's your job? And I say I work in fantasy sports, I get the same response. No shit, that's what you do for your job? And it's like, that's awesome. And that was always one of my goals too, is like, when I tell people what I do, I want them to get excited. And I'm glad to say that I've been able to achieve that up to this point.
Well, the show is not live, but I still get some questions coming in from Twitter here right now. And I need to know, I have to ask you about the Ty Johnson hype from last year and who gets the woof alert so far here in 2022.
Oh, man, the Ty Johnson stuff. It just didn't work out. He just never got enough playing time, unfortunately. The woof alert this year, man. I think for me, it's going to be DK Metcalf. A more high-profile player, but going back to drafting guys on good offenses, I'm so concerned about Metcalf and his fit with Geno and Drew Lock, and it's just worse than it was last year. And there are just so many receivers that I drafted last year thinking, oh, this guy will be fine. He'll be fine with this subpar quarterback. Like, he's good. Like, he'll be fine. And what I started to realize was, like, I was literally settling for players. I was like, oh, well, no, I'm going to settle for this player on a bad offense with a bad quarterback because I think that he's good. And that's fine. But I don't want my players to be fine. I want my players to go to the moon. I want them to skyrocket. I want them to thrive. And that's where you'll see my draft strategy based on. Like, I really try to attack, especially early on, these guys in good offenses because they have such higher floors based on the environments they play in. Like, if everything doesn't go right for Gabriel Davis, okay, let's say he doesn't break out. He still plays on the Bills. Like, he still is probably going to catch some touchdowns this year. So if he finishes, as wide receiver 36 and you paid for wide receiver 24, it's like, okay, like he didn't hit, but okay, he was okay. But Metcalf, it's like, oh, I'm going to pay up for this guy. He's going to be my wide receiver 2. Are you ever going to bench Metcalf? I just envision the season just being a disaster, and that's just why I just can't touch him. So he gets the wolf alert for me.
Yeah, those questions came in from someone you did a little bit of work with way back when there, who will remain nameless, but Brian. And so we know relationships are important. I mean, you've made a lot of connections. You talked about the networking aspect of fantasy football. Who are some of those people that you kind of respect who have helped you along the way so far?
Yeah, so I mentioned him before, Mitchell Renz. So he's over now at Chat Sports, doing the Raiders report. So he's not really in fantasy anymore. In particular, his career path kind of branched out into, more of NFL kind of analysis. But, he really kind of gave me the idea of like, hey, like you can actually make this like a job. Like you can work in sports real time. And that's something that we shared. And it's something that, I'm super grateful for him because, he ended up going for it. And obviously he ended up getting a really great job where he is now with Chat Sports. Not that it's not in fantasy, but, he's really happy where he is. And I definitely wouldn't have been able to make it here without him to where I am. Mike Riggs, guy over at Gridiron Experts, for basically giving me or awarding me my first, job as a writer. It's weird to think back, but, I still to this day remember the first article I ever wrote for Gridiron Experts. It was about Julius Thomas getting traded to or signing with the Miami Dolphins. And I was like, fade this guy. Ryan Tannehill is not Peyton Manning. This is easy analysis. And knocked it out of the park, Matt. Knocked it out of the park. Was so spot on. Julius Thomas basically did nothing for the rest of his career. So I was starting out hot. Don't know what happened after that. Things just kind of trickled off after that point. But Mike Riggs from Gridiron Experts obviously was very happy for the opportunity there. And then Jeff Ratcliffe, someone that I got basically introduced to, at the aforementioned Buffalo Wild Wings, a couple of years back. And at the time, I had been doing part-time work with PFF, not necessarily fantasy, but part of their base data collection, basically watching plays, basically looking at, okay, who's on the field on every play. It's a lot harder than it sounds as well. When you look at, you'd be surprised when you try to actually look at the numbers of the players on the field. You can't ever see the freaking numbers. You're looking at gloves and socks to try to figure out who's on the field and doing what. But that's besides the point. But, Jeff opened up with open arms to me and really opened up an opportunity for me at PFF. And unfortunately, when I got hired there 2 years ago, he ended up taking a different opportunity with FTN later. Now, at the time, he didn't know he was going to leave, but our paths only crossed for like a week. So I was bummed out that we didn't get to work longer together, but I knew that he had a great opportunity in front of him. So Jeff, and then obviously need to shout out Mike Tagliere as well. So we lost Mike last year, and I was bummed out that I wouldn't get the opportunity to work with Mike in a full-time capacity. And I'm super grateful for the things that he had said to me in passing. I got the chance to meet Mike a couple of years ago at the NFL draft. And at the time, I was an aspiring fantasy analyst. Again, going back to the networking thing, I went to the NFL draft because I was like, chances are there'll be people there that I can talk to about working in the space full time. Went by myself, stayed in a hostel. And that was my goal. I was like, at worst, I was like, you know what? Never been to Nashville. I hear that, they have a lot of bachelorette parties. It could be fun no matter what. The NFL draft's going on. So at worst, I just go to a city and have a good time. And if I don't see anyone or meet anybody, then oh well. But I knew that there was an opportunity there. And I'll never forget, basically stalking tags from the Instagram account that he was on. Okay, like tried to basically figuring out what rooftop bar he was at, then paying like $100 to go up to this rooftop bar just to meet tags and wearing his Nike hat, and getting the chance to talk to him and his wife, Tabby, and just like telling them my story, and then him just offering loads and loads of support. So the fact that now I get to work for Fantasy Pros, where Tag obviously made his name in the industry. I'm just really trying to continue on the legacy. I know I'll never be Tags, but he's someone that I think about constantly. Whenever I feel overwhelmed, I think about Tags, and I think about, hey, like, this guy was the friggin' machine, man. The primer, like, you can do this, Erickson. Like, you're fine. Like, come on, like, buck up. You're good to go. What would Tags do in this situation? It's like Tags would just keep writing until his arms fall off. So you need to keep at it too. So those are some people that I think that I would definitely wouldn't be here today without.
I love the mention of Tags there. He came on the show here, did the same show that you're doing with us right now, and it was one of those really eye-opening type conversations. I mean, we didn't really talk a whole lot of football. We talked more about life. When it was all said and done, it was probably one of the favorite shows I was able to be a part of there. Now, the one thing I got to ask is one piece of advice. What's the best piece of advice that you have received? And then I got a follow-up question right after that.
So the best piece of advice that I received was actually from Jeff Ratcliffe, and it was interesting in the way that he had approached me about it. Was when I first signed with PFF, I was under the impression that I would change my handle. I would change it to @Andrew Erickson _PFF or something like that, because that's what a lot of the guys do. And, I thought it was just like, oh, like status quo, whatever, like seems like a cool thing. I work for PFF. Like, why not? But, Jeff actually told me, he was like, hey, Andrew, like, don't do that. And I was like, oh, like, why? He's like, you want to remain like, remember, you don't want to be reliant on one company, or you want to be known as your own entity, basically, and not attach yourself to, a company, because you don't know where you're going to end up. You could leave PFF, like, you don't know. And obviously at the time, like, you never want to think about, the last thing you're thinking about is leaving a company when you first get hired by them. Of course, you're like, oh, I'm going to work here forever. Like, that's what we all think when we first get a new job. And of course, it's usually not, that's not in reality. But, it really opened my eyes to, like, oh yeah, that's a really good point. Like, you really should remain to your identity. And that's why I think, anyone that's starting off new, I'm always like opposed to, like, don't be like, dynasty, fantasy, blah, blah, blah. Like, be your name. Like, be you. Like, you can talk about fantasy, but you want to have that luxury and versatility to kind of like swap. So, like, I'm Andrew Erickson, formerly of PFF, and now I'm at Fantasy Pros. It's like I can like jump to place to place to place and kind of keep my social media presence and my presence as Andrew Erickson. Because at the end of the day, yes, I work for Fantasy Pros, I worked for PFF, but I'm always Andrew Erickson. Like, I am my own entity. I am my own enterprise, my own franchise, have you. And that's why I think it's important to always keep that in mind, even when you are working with other companies, and for the company that I currently work for, that you do offer more than just what the company's name.
That's excellent. I mean, I try to take the wife's name there, and I thought different of that once we got married. So I understand what's in a name. Now, I know you and your fiance, you got kind of things going on there. I don't know if you've looked that far into the future yet or what the situation may be, but we've talked about fantasy football advice. So let's hear a little bit of parenting advice from Andrew Erickson. What kind of parenting advice would you give out there right now?
I mean, me to like other.
Hey, whether you have kids or not, it doesn't matter. It's just, I mean, put your kid on one of those leashes. What, I don't know, like from someone without kids to someone with kids. What's
Okay.
one bit of parenting advice? Let's have some fun with this.
All right. So full disclosure, I do not have any children that I know of. Always full disclosure that I know of. And I guess parenting advice for me, it seems, I mean, I would say to love your children unconditionally. Maybe that's super cliche. And yeah, I guess I'm just gonna go with that. I don't really know. I mean, I know the other thing is like, don't pick favorites, or try not to be super obvious with who your favorite child is.
Oh no, we definitely pick favorites. Don't get me wrong. Hey, I have like 10 kids. I got my favorites. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I've definitely gotten that response from parents and saying, because I would assume that no, parents don't have favorites, like they must not. And then you kind of reflect on it. It's like, well, you probably do have favorites. So I would say at least try to be sneaky about have your favorites. Don't ever let your kids know who the favorites are.
Hey, whichever one makes my life easier, that's going to be the favorite for that week. I mean, it switches from time to time, but hey, we're not above cliche. We do cliche on the show all the time, so I got no problem with that. But hey, I want to thank you again for joining us here on Behind the Grind. Andrew, it's been a great show. I've had a lot of fun doing this one here. Hopefully we can do this again. Just got to give the people one more a little bit of a shout out there where they can find you. We know that we get you at Fantasy Pros there. We know it's at Andrew Erickson _ because that's your name, even with the underscore. I checked the birth certificate. What else do we got people to know right now?
Yeah, so same Twitter handle over on Instagram and on TikTok as well. I know I talked about TikTok. I'm doing some fun videos on there. That's where I really try to just have a fun time. I take whatever song is trending and I try to throw it with a fantasy spin. So that really gets my creative juices flowing. But over on Fantasy Pros, doing more stuff for the fantasy football draft kit. Basically updating. I'm releasing my draft slot preferences. So talking about, if you're playing in a redraft league, where should you pick? If you get the choice, I actually prefer, spoiler, I like the middle rounds. Picks 5 and 6, I think are sweet spots for drafts this season. You can read the full article breakdown, kind of like how I think that. And I'm always on the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. We're going to be bumping that up, I think, to 4 or 5 times a week at the beginning of August. So right now we're at 3 times a week. And next week, you can find me at Patriots Training Camp, where I will be scouting Ramondre Stevenson to see if he's actually getting work on third downs. I will be your boots on the ground for the New England Patriots, and I will be all eyes on Ramondre Stevenson. I'm going to watch him the whole time. I'm literally not going to watch any other players. All eyes on Ramondre Stevenson, because I think that dude, I guess I'm going to give a fantasy take. That dude is taking over. It's Ramondre's world, Matt, and we're just living in it.
You know what? I am so disappointed for Major right now because Major Caldwell at way too major. I mean, Ramondre Stevenson is his guy. So we know Andrew Erickson, he's going to be at the Patriots training camp. And we know N'Keal Harry, he won't be there. He gone. And so are we. So we'll see you next time. Take care.